Disney World is a magical place where detailed planning and strategy can go a long way, saving you hours in lines, preventing meltdowns, and maximising the fun. Obsessive planning for a theme park may seem a bit over the top, but those initial eye rolls at your colour-coded schedule can quickly turn to happy faces and unforgettable moments. Hi, I'm the Frugal Brit, and in this video I'll be covering my best pro tips to help you survive and thrive at Disney World, as well as becoming the most interesting person at parties. Without further ado, let's dive in. My first tip is all about navigating early entry in the parks without falling into common pitfalls. If you've already seen my Idiot's Guide to Disney World, you'll know this perk is only available to guests staying at a Disney World resort, giving you 30 minutes access to the parks before the general public. It's important to note that early entry works differently at each park. We're going to start with Magic Kingdom, which offers access to 2 lands at early entry, which are Fantasyland and Tomorrowland. This is a bit of a drawback though, as it results in a higher concentration of crowds, but at least there's a large number of rides in these lands. As guests arrive before the official early entry opening time, they'll often queue on the bridges leading to these 2 lands, with many of them hoping to ride Seven Dwarfs Mine Train before the day guests arrive. To do this efficiently, you'll need to arrive at least 30 minutes before the park officially opens, but be prepared to stand in the sun and face a bit of a scramble when it's time to move towards the queue. A very common mistake here is rushing straight to the attraction queue, only to find that the queue forms outside the main line, curving towards Storybook Circus. This can lead to a frustrating experience with guests pushing in line. Once you've endured this though, you should get on the ride without further issues, fingers crossed. Personally, I don't enjoy this strategy. It's a stressful way to start the day, and I'm not convinced it saves that much time given that you have to arrive so early before early entry starts. Whilst it's the most popular strategy for this ride, I have a few alternatives which I'll link to in the description. Instead of starting with this ride, I'd consider heading to Peter Pan's Flight, followed by the many adventures of Winnie the Pooh and It's a Small World. Alternatively, if you're more interested in Tomorrowland, start with Space Mountain, then hit Astro Orbiter and Buzz Lightyear's Space Ranger spin. Early entry at Epcot is not as chaotic as Magic Kingdom, but not without its quirks, especially since there's 2 entrances to consider. If you're staying at one of the Epcot resort hotels, you have the advantage of using the International Gateway entrance. For a smooth start, it's best to head straight to Remy's Ratatouille Adventure if that ride interests you. It's absolutely crucial to get there before early entry starts though, otherwise the queue can actually end up being longer than after the park opens to all guests, something I learnt the hard way. For those entering through the main entrance at the front of the park, your best bet is to head straight to Frozen Ever After in the Norway Pavilion. Previously, Test Track would have been another good option, but it's currently closed for a reimagining. For Hollywood Studios, there's a couple strategies that I recommend to make the most of your early entry. First, I'd aim to arrive about 40 minutes before the official early entry time. Often the park opens a bit earlier than advertised, giving you a valuable head start. Early entry here is a great way to avoid having to pay for a single pass on Rise of the Resistance. More on that service later. Prioritising this is usually less stressful than trying to tackle Seven Dwarfs Mine Train. If you arrive early enough, you can expect wait times between 15 to 30 minutes. If you manage to finish Rise of the Resistance during early entry, I recommend heading over to the Toy Story Land for Slinky Dog Dash, which typically has the second longest line in the park. Alternatively, you might consider starting your day in Toy Story Land with Slinky Dog Dash and saving Galaxy's Edge for much later in the day. Both strategies have their advantages, so obviously just go for whichever best suits your priorities. Next, we'll move over to Animal Kingdom, where things are a bit more straightforward. It tends to be less crowded during early entry compared to the others, making it easier to navigate. However, your options are pretty much limited to heading straight to Pandora for Flight of Passage, which will generate huge wait times for the entire day after rope drop. Tip number 2 is to not forget to join the virtual queue, whether it's for the 7 AM distribution or the 1 PM distribution. These queues are of course essential if you want to ride the newer headliner rides. To ensure you don't miss your chance, I'd recommend setting an alarm just before 7 AM so you're ready with the app open at the right time. If you do miss your chance in the morning, you'll get another shot at 1 PM, which will have more availability. I've heard many recommend using your phone's data instead of Disney World Wi-Fi for a more reliable and speedier connection. When you're in the parks, it's also easy to forget when you're in the virtual queue whilst you're doing other attractions, as boarding groups can be called quicker than you might expect. You do find though that cast members are generally quite lenient if you have to show up late, unlike with your Lightning Lane reservations where they'll refuse anyone later than 15 minutes. Another thing to mention here is that for Tron and Guardians, you might find it preferable to aim for the 1 PM distribution. Tron is better at night, and with Guardians, a later return time can place you near the front of the park in the afternoon when crowds tend to drift towards World Showcase. Finally, while the virtual queue system is designed to cut down wait times, be prepared for a potentially lengthy wait once you're in the line. My last ride on Guardians involved a 90-minute wait in the afternoon, so be prepared for losing a big chunk of time with your virtual queue reservation. My third pro tip is to go against the grain, which is important for all theme parks, but more so for Disney World. This begins even before you set foot in the park. When booking, best to avoid the busiest times of the year if you can. The peak periods are generally around spring break, the days between Christmas and New Year's. You might be surprised to learn that July, once considered the peak season, no longer sees the same level of crowds. I would say September is a great pick in terms of crowd levels if you don't mind the heat. When planning which days to visit each park, consider that there are some common visitor patterns that you might want to work around. I have heard from multiple sources that Magic Kingdom is busier on a Monday, as many vacationers choose to start their week at this park. Similarly, Epcot tends to be busier on weekends, as it's perfect for bar hopping. When it comes to navigating the parks, with Magic Kingdom, if you're arriving at Rope Drop, I'd steer clear of Tomorrowland and Fantasyland initially. These areas are usually packed with early entry guests. Instead, I'd head for Adventureland. The Jungle Cruise in particular can generate long waits, so best to enjoy it early. Additionally, with the opening of Tiana's Bayou Adventure, consider prioritising this attraction once the standby line becomes available. At Epcot, going against the grain involves starting your day in World Showcase. This area tends to be quieter in the morning, as most guests initially focus on the rides near the front of the park. By enjoying World Showcase pavilions early on, you can avoid the crowds that gather in the afternoon. As the day progresses, consider moving towards the front of the park to experience attractions like Spaceship Earth and Soarin'. These rides generally have shorter wait times in the late afternoon or early evening after guests leave for World Showcase. At Hollywood Studios, going against the grain means avoiding the immediate rush to Galaxy's Edge and Toy Story Land at Rope Drop, which will be filled with early entry guests. Instead, consider starting your day with Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway, as this attraction tends to develop long wait times shortly after the park opens. Another great area to visit early in the day is Sunset Boulevard, home to the Tower of Terror and Rock and Roller Coaster. These rides are less crowded than the first hour and tend to quieten down after 5 PM on most days. However, keep in mind that due to Hollywood Studios' relatively compact size, wait times across the park can increase significantly after your first or second ride. If you're interested in Toy Story Land, it's often best to head there after 6 PM, when many families begin to leave the park. But Toy Story Mania may have reasonable times within the first 30 minutes of park opening if you choose to start there. As for Galaxy's Edge, expect it to be busy throughout the day, typically until around 7 or 8 PM. Animal Kingdom is probably the easiest of the 4 parks to go against the grain. Essentially, if you avoid the peak hours between 10 and 3, you can enjoy most of the park without heavy crowds, with Pandora being the exception. For Kilimanjaro safaris, it's a great idea to visit first thing in the morning when the animals are most active. But if you can't make it at Rope Drop, the queue will be long, so it might be better to wait until after 4 PM when the lines typically shorten and the animals become more active again. The Festival of the Lion King in Africa has a large seating capacity, but it fills up quickly. To secure a good spot, plan to arrive 20 to 30 minutes before show time. You'll generally find the lowest crowds at the first show of the day or during the last 2 shows. Expedition Everest is another good rope drop pick, as it usually has reasonable wait times in the first hour of the day. The lines also tend to diminish after 5 PM, making it a good time to visit if you don't get to it earlier. Kali River Rapids doesn't open until the second hour the park is open, and this is when you'll find the best wait times. During the summer, it's best to avoid getting in line after 10 AM, as it tends to get busier with guests looking to cool off. For Dinosaur, you have more flexibility. As long as you avoid the window between 11 and 1, the wait time shouldn't be too bad. My next tip is to become a night owl. Whilst the parks are delightful at any hour, and arriving early is a great strategy, there are some unique advantages to being willing to stay up late in Disney World. First off, Florida's heat is obviously super intense during the day. This cooler weather makes for a pleasant stroll through Disney World's beautifully lit areas, where the parks have a different charm under the night sky. In particular, many of the outdoor rides at Magic Kingdom like Big Thunder Mountain Railroad and Seven Dwarfs Mine Train look even better when lit up at night. It is a shame though that Animal Kingdom currently closes before nightfall. This means guests miss out on the enchanting bioluminescent plants and pathways that come alive after dark. Disney World is also renowned for its nighttime entertainment, offering a range of incredible shows and firework displays, which we'll be covering in more detail in the next tip. Another major advantage of staying late is the smaller crowds and shorter lines, as families often head back to their accommodations in the early evening, so the parks become quieter, making it the perfect time to experience attractions without the usual wait times. Lastly, the parks are open later than most guests realise. If the park closes at 11 PM, you can actually jump in line at 10:59. I've heard this described as the reverse rope drop tactic, perfect for hitting those super headliner attractions. You've just got to hope though that there's no technical difficulties at the end of the night. My next tip is all about maximising your budget for what often feels like the most expensive place on earth. Disney World is a dream destination and a once-in-a-lifetime experience for many. Disney knows this and and has all sorts of clever ways to extract as much cash as possible out of you. But with a few savvy strategies, you can enjoy a magical trip without breaking the bank. We'll begin with food and drink. A good way to save money and time here is by eating at the hotel before heading to the parks. When I'm with the family, I'll always have food delivered to the hotel on the day we arrive. If you're eating in the parks, be prepared to pay a premium. One trick is to order from the kids menu if you're not too hungry. The portion sizes are often generous. Sharing meals is another option. One thing I do really prefer about the Universal parks is the Coke freestyle machines that they have located throughout, providing easy access to ice water. This is a lot less convenient at Disney parks. However, there are some ways to stay hydrated for free. Most of the restrooms accessed outside will have water fountains nearby. The My Disney Experience app also now lets you search for bottle refill stations, which is super handy. Pretty much all quick service locations will give you free ice water if you ask. A handy tip here is to always ask for more than you think you'll need. You'll also find quick service restaurants with drink refill stations that provide water, which saves you having to queue to get a cast member's attention. You just have to press the grey button above the Minute Maid. Lastly, for parents visiting Disney, the pressure to spend a fortune on merchandise is real, especially when exiting a ride through the gift shop. It might sound a bit trashy, but a great tip I've used in the past is to pack lots of small and fairly inexpensive gifts purchased outside of the parks, like Lego minifigures, which I'll then hand out when exiting a ride. Save me a fortune. Tip number 6 is to not waste money on lightning lanes. I'm not saying they can't be very useful, but there have been times when I have wasted money on these, and so I'll try to help you guys avoid similar situations. For those unfamiliar, Disney has revamped its line skipping options, now offering 2 paid services, Lightning Lane Multi-Pass and Lightning Lane Single Pass. Multi-Pass lets you reserve up to 3 days before your trip, with the option to pick additional reservations each time you tap in on the day. The Single Pass is specifically for the super duper headliner rides, where you pay once and ride once, also booked up to 3 days in advance. I'll include more detailed guides to these in the descriptions, but the key change is that you can now make reservations up to 3 days before the day you visit the chosen park, and you no longer have to do this at 7 AM on the day. On-site guests will enjoy a special perk. They can book reservations for the entire duration of their stay, as long as it's within 7 days of the first trip. So should you be using these services? The answer depends on the park and your situation. For instance, Animal Kingdom has fewer attractions, so the value of the multi-pass there is not great in my opinion. At this park, I'd actually argue that paying for this single pass on Flight of Passage makes more sense. With multi-pass, it's a similar story with Epcot to a lesser extent. On the other hand, Magic Kingdom, with its abundance of rides, offers more opportunities to maximise the multi-pass, but does cost a bit more. If you're planning a longer stay at Disney World, especially during the quieter period, you might not need these passes at all. Early entry, rope dropping and reverse rope dropping can help you avoid long waits. If you do plan on splurging on multi-passes with the on-site advantage, I recommend planning to visit Magic Kingdom and Hollywood Studios at the end of your trip, which will help you to secure Disney World's most popular Lightning Lane reservations, including Slinky Dog Dash and Tiana's, etc. Doing this should also mean you get reservations for earlier in the day, which means you'll be able to start reserving additional rides much sooner. I'll cover these rules in the description, as well as which rides I recommend that you prioritise. My next pro tip is all about making the most of the gap fillers in each park. By gap fillers, I mean those rides and attractions with little to no wait time, and also may involve some air conditioning. These are perfect for those moments in the middle of the day when the parks are at their busiest, or if you need to fill time before your next Lightning Lane reservation. In Magic Kingdom, some of my favourite gap fillers include the Swiss Family Robinson Treehouse, bit of a polarising attraction. I've heard some jokingly describe it as a themed ride queue but without the ride, but I've always been a fan. If you time it right, Liberty Square Riverboat is a great way to fill time with some great views. You can also escape the heat on the lower deck. Tom Sawyer Island is an underrated area to let kids run off some steam and give them some freedom to explore before you force them back onto your strict itinerary. The People Mover in Tomorrowland has a great turnover of guests, so you'll rarely have to wait longer than 15 minutes. If air conditioning is the priority, then you've got the Enchanted Tiki Room, Hall of Presidents, Carousel of Progress, and Monsters Inc. Laugh Floor. Parents may need to manage expectations though for some of these. Over in Epcot, you can explore the Journey of Water self-guided exploration trail, or enjoy classic experiences like Living with the Land, The Seas with Nemo and Friends, Grand Fiesta Tour, and Journey into Imagination with Figment. Of course, you've also got the shows and World Showcase, which are perfect for a bit of air-conditioned respite. In Hollywood Studios, you don't have much in the way of gap filler rides, unfortunately, but Star Tours is a great choice. The park does, however, offer a lot of great shows to fill time, too many to mention really. You've also got the Walt Disney Presents exhibit. Finally, in Animal Kingdom, filling gaps is easy with all the incredible animal exhibits. If you had a lot of time to kill, the Wildlife Express train and Rafiki's Planet Watch is an option. You've got some incredible shows here as well, Festival of the Lion King being the obvious example. Tip number 8 is to plan for the big signature spectacles, which are key to a Disney World trip. Let's start with Festival of the Fantasy Parade, which is typically shown twice a day. The obvious tip is to arrive early. I recommend around 30 minutes before the parade starts. The best spots are around the Plaza Hub and Main Street, which provide a stunning backdrop. Frontierland is less hectic and still offers great views. Here's a look on the map of some of the best vantage points that are often overlooked. Next up is Happily Ever After. The best views are between the Plaza Hub and the castle, but you'll need to arrive between 60 to 90 minutes before the show starts to get a good spot, which is far too long for me personally. Other options include the bridge between the Plaza Hub and Tomorrowland, as well as between Seven Dwarfs Mine Train and Enchanted Tales with Belle, although you will miss a bit of the fireworks behind you. My preferred pick is probably in the middle of Main Street. In Epcot, you have Luminous, the Symphony of Us nighttime show. Unlike its predecessor, there's no screens, so you can view it from all around the lagoon. To avoid crowds, I'd recommend finding somewhere on the northern side of the lagoon, like one of these spots. The absolute best spot to view it will be between the two gift shops at the entrance to World Showcase. Finally, Fantasmic is the big nighttime spectacular in Hollywood Studios. During peak times of the year, there will often be 2 shows per night, with the second one being less crowded, being the better seating options. As you'd expect, best views are in the centre around 3 rows back. For all but the absolute busiest times of the year, I'd recommend arriving 30 minutes before showtime. My 9th tip is to not judge a ride by its line length, as a long line doesn't always point to it being superior. Various factors such as ride capacity and novelty play big roles in shaping wait times. The first example that always springs to mind is Jungle Cruise, which hopefully isn't too controversial for me to say, despite its special place in the hearts of most Disney fans. It's obviously not a bad ride, but the younger and less nostalgic guests do often feel shortchanged after waiting so long. The same goes for Peter Pan's flight to a lesser extent. Of course, all subjective. Feel free to share your opinion in the comments. Spinner rides such as the Magic Carpets of Aladdin are notorious for their slow turnover of guests. Similar story with Dumbo the Flying Elephant, but at least that one has an indoor play area in the middle of the queue. I'll throw in another controversial opinion, which is that Seven Dwarfs Mine Train doesn't quite live up to the expectations set by its endless line. If you can't do the reverse rope drop for this ride, or find the budget for a single pass, guests with limited time might want to consider skipping it and riding Big Thunder Mountain twice instead. As you've probably gathered, this tip is more aimed at Magic Kingdom, but one exception is Navi River Journey at Animal Kingdom. I do actually love this ride, but it's really not worth waiting an hour for. My number 10 pick is to avoid burnout, which is probably the most frequently repeated tip by seasoned Disney World fans. There's often pressure to check everything off your list, but important to appreciate that having the most fun does not equate to getting on the most rides, especially when young kids are involved, who from experience often have a better time when they're given more freedom rather than being rushed from one area to the next constantly. I'm not saying that having an ambitious itinerary is necessarily a bad thing, but there is a fine line between being overscheduled and underscheduled. Getting the right balance is key. One of my favourite ways to avoid burnout is by planning a dining reservation weeks ahead of the trip, which gives everyone a chance to cool down, relax and fuel up. If I'm on a budget, I'll go for a quick service restaurant with indoor seating. The best pick here has to be Columbia Harbour House. Most guests don't seem to realise that there's a second floor with no shortage of seating. One of my favourite places to go and relax. With so much walking at Disney World, your feet can start to give you grief. Often takes a day or two to become an issue. My preferred footwear strategy is to alternate between Crocs and Tevas, swapping every couple days. The best thing about these is that you don't have to worry about getting wet feet and socks on a water ride or during heavy rain. Additionally, consider bringing moleskin to combat any blisters. Well, that's all my best pro tips. Thank you for watching. I often find with these sorts of videos, the best tips are in the comments, so I'd love you guys to share your favourites. If you found the video helpful, be sure to give it a like and check out my other Orlando vacation content for more insight. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to stay up to date. See you in the next video.